We landed the contract in early May 2023. The job was straightforward. Conduct a sonar scan and map the bottom of a swampy bayou off the Pascagoula River in southern Mississippi. The client was a private environmental auditing firm from New Orleans. Officially, they were looking for submerged industrial waste from the 1960s. Unofficially, as we all understood Mr. Harrison, the company's owner and an avid history buff, was searching for remnants of military hardware from an old training base shut down after the Korean War. The area was remote, marshy, a perfect place for something to disappear without a trace. Our team consisted of 4 people. Me, Mike, the lead diver and team supervisor. Jake, my partner, a former Air Force engineer with colossal diving experience. David, our sonar operator and resident tech genius. And Harrison himself, who insisted on being present. He didn't get in the way, just sat in the shade under the boat's awning, watching the monitors and occasionally asking questions. The first 3 days were pure routine. The heat was unbearable, the humidity so thick that your clothes were soaked within 10 minutes of leaving the cabin. The bayou water was dark, almost black like used engine oil, and swarming with mosquitoes. David methodically guided the boat in a grid pattern, while the sonar painted a dreary picture of a silted bottom littered with cypress stumps and the occasional piece of junk. We found a couple of sunken John boats and a rusted-out section of some old pontoon, but nothing that would interest Harrison. The mood on the boat was calm, even apathetic. It was just another job. Everything changed on the morning of the 4th day, a Tuesday. David, who had been silent for nearly an hour, suddenly sat bolt upright in his chair and beckoned me over. "Mike, get over here. Look at this." On the side-scan sonar screen, a long, unnaturally straight shadow was visible. It didn't look like a log or a geological formation. The edges were too clean, the angles too sharp. The object was large, at least 40 feet long, lying at a depth of about 30 feet, half buried in the silt. "What do you think that is?" I asked. "I don't know," David said. "The outlines are jagged, but the structure is definitely man-made. Too big for a recreational boat. Looks like a section of a barge, maybe, but what's it doing out in this wilderness?" Harrison, overhearing us, came closer. His eyes lit up with a keen interest. "This is it," he said quietly. "I'm sure of it. Get ready to dive." Jake and I started prepping our gear, checking regulators, gauges, air supply. It was a standard procedure, honed automaticity, but a new tension hung in the air. We all knew there was something unusual down there. Visibility underwater was practically zero. Even our powerful dive lights couldn't penetrate the murky suspension more than 2 or 3 feet. We had to work almost entirely by feel. We dropped a marker buoy directly over the object and began our descent, following the line down. At 25 feet, we entered a layer of cold water. The temperature dropped sharply by several degrees. A few feet deeper, my glove hand touched something hard and cold. I ran my hand along the surface. It was smooth, covered in a thin layer of slippery silt. I shone my flashlight directly on it. Metal, dull, grayish metal with rows of rivets. This wasn't a barge hull. The rivets were too small, flush with the skin, aviation style. "Jake, it's an aircraft," I said into my headset microphone. "Copy that," he replied, his voice calm as always, moving along the fuselage toward the nose. We swam slowly alongside the object. It was indeed a fragment of a large airplane. We identified part of the center wing box and the root of the right wing. The skin was torn and bent like a tin, ripped open by a giant knife. It was obvious the machine had fallen from a great height and broken apart on impact with the water. We couldn't see the tail section or the left wing. They were likely somewhere nearby, completely buried in the silt. After about 15 minutes of surveying, we came upon the cockpit. It was surprisingly intact. The plexiglass canopy was shattered, but the frame itself had survived. The cockpit was filled with silt and algae. I shined my light inside, trying to make out the instrument panel, and that's when I saw him. A pilot was sitting in the seat. The body was held in place by the harness straps. He wore a flight helmet and an oxygen mask. The water and the anaerobic environment of the silt had done something strange. There was almost no decomposition. The skin on the visible parts of his face and hands had a waxy, unnaturally pale shade. He didn't look like a man who had been underwater for decades. He looked like he had died yesterday. It was wrong. It was creepy, but first and foremost, it was wrong from a biological and chemical standpoint. I'm a professional diver. I've seen drowned men. They don't look like this. Jake, we've got a pilot. I reported to the surface, trying to keep my voice steady. Body is in a good state of preservation. Copy that, Mike. Don't touch anything. Document everything on camera. David's voice came back. Jake swam up beside me and peered into the cockpit. He was silent for a few seconds, then slowly swept his flashlight beam along the edge of the broken canopy. It's a Sabre, he said. North American F-86 Sabre. Jet fighter from the 50s. How do you know? I worked on museum pieces at Edwards Air Force Base. I'd recognize that instrument panel anywhere. We continued our inspection. On a fragment of the wing, slightly away from the fuselage, some symbols were visible beneath a layer of grime. We carefully cleaned the surface with our gloves. Stenciled letters and numbers in dark blue paint emerged. AF-51 to 922, a U.S. Air Force serial number. The 51 meant the year was ordered 1951. Jake took several clear shots of the number with his camera. Our bottom time was running out, so we began our ascent. On the boat, an excited silence reigned. Harrison looked like a man who had found the Holy Grail. He immediately got on his satellite phone, calling his contacts to run the serial number through Air Force archives. Jake and I stripped off our gear, my mind replaying the image of the pilot and his strange preservation. David downloaded the photos from Jake's camera to his laptop. He brought the picture of the serial number up on the screen. AF-51 to 922, he read aloud. Let's see what the internet has to say. And that's when the first event that defied logic occurred. Jake, who was standing beside him looking at the screen, suddenly froze. He leaned in closer, his face turning serious. Wait, he said. Zoom in. David enlarged the image. The numbers were clear, unmistakable. 922. What is it, Jake? I asked. He didn't answer right away, staring at the screen as if he couldn't believe his eyes. That's not possible, he finally said. What's not possible? You've seen the number in a museum? I suggested. You said you worked on them. No, Jake shook his head. Not in a museum. I saw it at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, at the Boneyard, around 2010 or 2011. David and I exchanged a look. The Boneyard is the world's largest aircraft storage and disposal facility. You must be mistaken, I said gently. Numbers can be similar. It's been over a decade. I'm not mistaken, Jake said firmly, his voice holding not a shred of doubt. I have a good memory for numbers. It was part of a project inventorying old airframes for potential conversion into target drones. That specific airframe, 922, was in the back row. I remember it because it had an unusual squadron emblem on the nose I'd never seen before. That plane was in storage. I physically put my hands on it. It couldn't be here at the bottom of a swamp. A silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the hum of the generator. Jake's words sounded absurd. A plane from the 50s, found in a Mississippi swamp, could not simultaneously be in storage in Arizona in 2010. It was impossible. But I knew Jake. He was the most meticulous and precise person I had ever worked with. If he said he remembered it, he remembered it. Just then, Harrison's sat phone rang again. He listened, his face falling. He ended the call and looked at us. I just got the preliminary data on the number, he said slowly. Airframe AF-51 to 922, an F-86 Sabre fighter, was reported missing on October 18, 1958. The pilot was Captain John Rendell. He was last seen during a training flight over the Mojave Desert, California. The search and rescue operation found nothing. He was officially declared deceased. He paused. California, not Mississippi. That's a distance of nearly 2,000 miles. And what's even stranger, in 2003, that same airframe, according to the documents, was written off and disposed of at Davis-Monthan. Post-loss disposal. Probably a bureaucratic error. We were silent. So, we had a plane that vanished in 1958 in California, was supposedly scrapped in Arizona in 2003, which Jake says was physically present in storage in that same Arizona boneyard in 2010, and which we just found at the bottom of a swamp in Mississippi, with a pilot's body inside. The story was no longer just an interesting find. It was becoming impossible. We decided to contact the Jackson County authorities immediately. It's one thing to find a historical artifact. It's another thing entirely to discover a crash site with human remains. This was no longer our jurisdiction. While Harrison was on the phone again, this time with the sheriff's office, Jake David, and I tried to process what we had heard. 3 different, mutually exclusive facts about the same airplane. The brain refused to accept it. David, ever the technician, looked for the simplest explanation. A clerical error, he suggested, staring at his laptop. Record keeping in the 50s was all on paper. Someone mixed up a digit on the write-off, and Jake saw a similar number, 923 instead of 922. Memory is a tricky thing. Mine isn't, Jake cut in. He pulled a notepad and a pencil from his bag and began to sketch rapidly. He wasn't an artist, but his lines were precise and confident. A minute later, he held the notepad out to us. On the page was a drawing of an angry hornet in a flight helmet, clutching a lightning bolt. The drawing was detailed. This was painted on the nose of that saber in Arizona, he said. The emblem of the 152nd Fighter Squadron. They were based in Nevada. I'd never seen it before, that's why I remembered it. And the number was 922. I'd staked my license on it. Harrison finished his call and turned to us. The sheriff is sending a boat. They'll be here in an hour or so. They said not to touch anything and stay put. He's also notifying Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi. Said since it's a military aircraft, they'll have to turn the case over to the feds. That was expected. Our private expedition was over. Now the big players were coming into the game. Harrison looked simultaneously disappointed that his find was being taken away and thrilled by the mystery he had stumbled upon. He asked David to copy all the sonar data and photos for him. Just in case, he said. We spent the next hour in a silent wait. Jake sat on the stern, staring at the dark water, fiddling with his notepad. David dove into online military archives, muttering about serial number confusion and procurement contracts. I kept replaying the scene from the depths of my head. The still figure in the seat, the waxy face, the unnatural preservation. Something about it all was fundamentally wrong. And it wasn't just the conflicting data. It felt like we had found a piece of reality that didn't fit with the rest of the world, like a puzzle piece from the wrong box. Soon, a police boat appeared on the horizon. It pulled alongside us, and a deputy sheriff climbed aboard. He was a stocky man in his 50s with sun-bleached hair and a calm, weary face. His name was Miller. We showed him the photos and sonar data. He listened to my brief report, nodding. I intentionally omitted Jake's story about the base in Arizona and the disposal confusion. It sounded too wild and wasn't relevant to the core facts at this stage. My job was to report the facts. Crash site found, serial number confirmed, body inside. All right, boys, thanks for your work, Miller said after he finished. We and the military will take it from here. You'll likely have to give official statements back on shore. For now, your job here is done. He was about to return to his boat when a growing roar came from the south. A few minutes later, a helicopter appeared over the cypress tops. It was black, with no identifying marks except for a small American flag on its tail. It didn't land but hovered over a nearby, more open stretch of water, and a rigid-hulled inflatable boat was lowered from it. 3 men in military fatigues were in the boat. They reached us quickly. The senior man was an Air Force major named Evans. He was tall, fit, with a crew cut and watchful, cold eyes. He introduced himself as a liaison officer from Keesler. He wasted no time on pleasantries. He wanted to see everything we had: data, photos, dive logs. David connected his ruggedized laptop to a large monitor in the cabin, and we displayed all the information. Major Evans studied the photographs in silence, his face expressionless. He carefully examined the shot of the serial number. then switched to the photos of the cockpit and the pilot. "The image quality is good," he stated. "It's private equipment," Harrison replied. "I understand. You will turn over all original files, as well as any copies. To me, this is now evidence in a federal investigation." Evans said, "It wasn't an order. It was a statement of fact." Then he turned to me. "You personally saw the body? Describe its condition." I described in detail what I had seen. The preservation, the lack of visible decay, the waxy color of the skin, the position of the body. Evans listened without interrupting. "You said that according to preliminary archive data, this is Captain John Rendell, missing since '58? He asked, turning to Harrison. "Yes," Harrison confirmed. "Went missing over the Mojave." Major Evans held his gaze on the photograph of the pilot's face for a few seconds. Then he took out his own satellite phone, walked to the bow of our boat, and made a call. He spoke, quietly, almost in a whisper, using short, clipped phrases in some kind of code. We couldn't make out the words. After a couple of minutes, he returned. His face was even more impenetrable, if that were possible. "A discrepancy has arisen," he said, choosing his words slowly. He looked at us again, and something new appeared in his eyes. Not just professional interest, but caution. "We will have to wait here for the arrival of a special team from the Pentagon." "What kind of discrepancy?" Harrison couldn't help but ask. Major Evans paused, as if deciding what he could tell civilians. "According to the official report," he said in a flat, metallic voice, "the case of Captain John Rendell was closed in 1961. Hikers discovered a fragment of his flight jacket with his dog tags on a mountainside in San Bernardino County. Forensic analysis later confirmed that biological materials found at the site belonged to the captain. His remains were returned to his family and buried." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The man you found in that plane cannot be Captain Rendell. We don't know who that is." The silence that followed his words was thick and heavy, like the swamp water beneath us. Every new detail didn't clarify the situation, but instead tangled it into utter absurdity. We had a plane that shouldn't be here, with a pilot inside who wasn't who he was supposed to be, all of which contradicted not one, but several official documents. I looked at Jake. He didn't look surprised. He was just watching Major Evans, and his face said, "I told you this was all wrong." In that moment, I knew Jake's story about the plane in Arizona wasn't a trick of memory. It was another piece of the impossible mosaic we had started to assemble, and I began to feel truly, deeply uneasy. Major Evans's declaration that the pilot wasn't Rendell hung in the hot, humid air of a bayou. It brought no clarity, only another layer of absurdity, turning the situation into something resembling a fever dream. The four of us civilians were now at the center of an event that was clearly far outside standard protocols. Deputy Miller, realizing his authority here was finished, quietly moved to the side of his own boat, preferring not to interfere in military affairs. Harrison tried to ask Evans more questions, but the Major's replies were curt. "Information is limited. Await instructions." The wait stretched for nearly 3 hours. The sun began to dip toward the west, painting the dark water in shades of crimson. During that time, another boat arrived. Not a police vessel, but a gray, unmarked craft with several more men in uniforms like Evans's. They didn't engage with us. They simply waited, forming a kind of invisible perimeter around our small boat. We felt less like witnesses and more like suspects, or at least unwanted elements. David pointedly shut down his laptop and put away. Jake remained on the stern, his face a stone mask. When the black helicopter returned, this time escorted by a larger Chinook transport helicopter, it was clear the wait was over. The Chinook hovered over the water, and a massive platform with equipment was lowered from its ramp, along with another team. These men were dressed differently, not in military uniforms, but in dark, practical coveralls with no insignia. The man in charge was civilian. He was a medium height and unremarkable appearance, dressed in simple gray slacks and a dark blue polo shirt. He looked to be in his 50s. He stepped onto our boat with an agility that belied his office worker look. "Mr. Harrison?" he asked, addressing our client. His voice was quiet and calm. "My name is Gray. I represent the agency handling this matter." Thank you and your team for your work. From this point on, we'll take it from here." Major Evans approached him and quietly gave a situation report. Gray listened, nodding, his eyes flicking over each of us. It was an assessing, analytical gaze that was deeply unsettling. "I'll need all your records," Gray said, now addressing all of us. "Digital media, logs, personal notes, everything related to this discovery. My people will make copies. The originals will remain with us. This is not a request. It is a condition of your continued safety and confidentiality." No one argued. David silently produced his laptop and external drives. I handed over my tablet with the dive logs. Harrison gave up his phone. Gray's men, working with the speed and coordination of a well-oiled machine, connected our equipment to their own and began copying everything. Then Gray turned to Jake. "Mr. He glanced at a document Evans handed him. Ripley, Jake Ripley, former Air Force engineer, service at Edwards and Nellis, contract work at Davis Mountain between 2009 and 2011. Correct." Jake tensed. "Correct. Major Evans mentioned in his report that you have certain recollections regarding this aircraft serial number. Could you elaborate for me?" Jake shot me a quick look. I gave a barely perceptible nod. Hiding anything from these people was pointless and probably dangerous. Calmly and methodically, Jake told Gray about the plane in the boneyard, the Hornet emblem, his certainty about the number. Gray listened without interruption, his face impassive. "Interesting," he said when Jake had finished. "Very interesting. Thank you for your candor." Meanwhile, Gray's team had set up a complete operations center on the floating platform. Powerful floodlights bathed the area around our boat in brilliant light. 2 of their divers were preparing to go down. Their equipment was far more advanced than ours. Closed-circuit rebreathers that produced no bubbles, helmets with integrated high-resolution video systems streaming a live feed to Gray's monitors. It looked like something out of a sci-fi movie, not a standard recovery operation. We were politely but firmly asked to stay out of the way in the cabin. The door was open, however, and we could see everything on Gray's monitors. The image quality was astounding. We saw the pilot's cockpit again, but now in minute detail. The divers worked with surgical precision. One of them used a special tool to cut the harness straps. Then, carefully, using inflatable lip bags, they began to extract the body from the cockpit. 20 minutes later, a sealed black bag was brought to the surface. It was immediately transferred to the platform and taken inside a small, inflatable tent labeled biocontainment. Jake and I exchanged a look. Such precaution seemed excessive. Yes, the body had been in the water, but this was an Ebola outbreak zone. Gray seemed to read our minds. Standard procedure when dealing with unknown variables. He tossed over his shoulder, not taking his eyes off a monitor where one of his people, now in a full hazmat suit, was beginning to inspect the bag's contents. We couldn't see the body itself, only the specialist's gloved hands methodically checking the pockets of the flight suit. First, they pulled out a folding knife, then a Zippo lighter, typical pilot's effects from that era, and then the specialist removed a wallet, a standard leather wallet, darkened by water but surprisingly intact. It was handed to Gray. Gray put on gloves and carefully began to remove the contents. A few waterlogged bills, a photo of a young woman so faded the image was nearly gone, and finally, a military ID card. It had been tucked into a plastic sleeve and was in the best condition of all. Gray slid it out and held it up to the light. He studied it for a long time, then turned to us. For the first time, something like an emotion crossed his face, an extreme, almost academic curiosity. "Gentlemen," he said, and his quiet voice sounded deafeningly loud in the sudden silence. "According to this identification, the pilot is Captain John Rendell. But that's impossible," Harrison exclaimed. "You yourself said his remains were found and buried." Gray didn't answer. He simply took a step toward us and held out the ID so we could see it. I was expecting to see a yellowed, tattered document from 60 years ago. What I saw made my blood run cold. The ID card looked like it had been printed yesterday. The plastic was perfectly clear, without a single scratch. The paper beneath it was brilliant white, untouched by moisture or time. The fonts were as crisp as laser engraving. And the photograph, it was in perfect high-definition focus. It showed the same man we had seen in the cockpit, but alive, looking directly into the camera. It wasn't a photograph from the 1950s. It was a modern digital photograph, inserted into a half-century-old document. It was then that I finally understood. We hadn't stumbled upon a historical mystery or a bureaucratic error. We had raised something from the swamp floor that didn't obey the laws of time and logic. And now, that something was in the hands of people who seemed entirely unsurprised by it. Mr. Gray placed the ID card into a sealed evidence bag. He looked at our stunned faces without a flicker of sympathy. To him, our reaction was just another variable to be managed and controlled. As I said, he repeated in his quiet, even voice, "We'll take it from here. Your work is concluded, Mr. Harrison. Your company will receive full compensation for time and resources, plus an additional grant for your assistance in a matter of national security. The funds will be in your account within 48 hours. He spoke of the money as if it were a way to buy our silence. And from the way Harrison paled, it was working. Now, gentlemen, you will sign a few documents, Gray continued. An aide handed him a thin folder containing 4 stacks of paper, each an inch thick. This is a standard non-disclosure agreement. It states that you will never, under any circumstances, discuss the events of the past 24 hours. Not with each other, not with your families, not with the press. You did not see an airplane, a pilot, or us. You conducted a routine environmental scan and found nothing. Any violation of this agreement will result in the most severe consequences under the Espionage Act. Is that clear?" The question was rhetorical. We understood perfectly. This wasn't a request to keep quiet. It was a direct threat wrapped in a legal document. One by one, they handed us a pen. I signed without reading. What was the point? The signature was a formality. The real agreement was made the moment we saw their faces. Jake signed in silence, his jaw tight. David, swallowing hard, quickly scrawled his name. Harrison was the last, his hand trembling noticeably. "Excellent," Gray said, collecting the documents. "You will now be escorted to shore. Your boat will remain here. We'll return to Marina in a few days after a technical inspection. Don't worry, we'll take care of your property." We were effectively being kicked off our own vessel. 2 men in coveralls gestured us toward the gray boat tied alongside ours. We climbed aboard, taking nothing with us but the clothes on our backs. As our escort boat pulled away, I looked back. The bright floodlights still illuminated the Discovery site. I saw the Chinook helicopter hover over the water again, lowering a complex system of cables and grapples. They were going to raise the wreckage quickly under the cover of night, leaving no witnesses. They were erasing the event from reality. The trip to the marina was made in complete silence. The men escorting us didn't say a word. They dropped us at the dock, waited until we were in our truck, and stood there until we had pulled out onto the highway. Only then did their boat turn and disappear back into the darkness of the bayous. For the first half hour in the truck, no one spoke. The shock had given way to a dull, oppressive fear. We drove north, away from the coast. "We need to find a hotel," I finally said, breaking the silence. "Get a room and think." We stopped at the first nondescript motel we found on the highway. I got 2 adjoining rooms. Harrison immediately locked himself in one, saying he needed to call his lawyer. Jake, David, and I gathered in the other. The room was shabby, smelling of dust and cheap cleaning solution. The setting was a stark contrast to the high-tech, sterile operation we had just witnessed. They took everything, I said. Every last bite of information. We have nothing. David gave a crooked smile. He reached into his pants pocket and pulled out a tiny flash drive, no bigger than a fingernail. "Almost everything," he said. "When their guy plugged into my rig, I managed to run a background script, copied the primary data packet to this. The transfer took 3 seconds. They checked the drives, but they didn't check the RAM. Amateurs." A surge of adrenaline hit me. We had a foothold. What's on it? Sonar maps, all the photos, including the shots of the serial number and the pilot, and something else. something strange. David pulled his personal netbook from his backpack, a device he never connected to our work equipment. He inserted the drive. We huddled around the small screen. First, he opened the photos. There was the serial number, the cockpit, and the impossible ID card. Even on the netbook screen, its unnatural newness was visible. "Now look at this," David said, opening an audio and radio signal analysis program. A complex waveform appeared on the screen. Our underwater imaging unit isn't just a camera. It's full of diagnostic sensors. One of them monitors the ambient radio frequency background for calibration. Normally, it just shows static, but when you guys were near the cockpit, it picked this up. He pointed to a thin, barely perceptible peak on the graph. It was a very weak, intermittent signal. Ultra-low frequency, not a radio transmission in the usual sense, more like a residual emission. It's a digital data packet, repeating every 17 seconds. Short and encrypted. I couldn't break it, but I extracted the sequence itself. A string of letters and numbers, separated by dashes, appeared on the screen. XA7 G7-1D09. What does it mean? I asked. No idea, David admitted. The format doesn't match any known communication protocol. Jake, who had been staring silently at the screen, suddenly leaned closer. Show me that again. David brought the string back up. XA7 G7-1D09. Jake read aloud. He frowned, and then his eyes widened in recognition. My God, it's not a communication protocol. Then what is it? It's an inventory number from a 1950s cataloging system. Jake said they used it for components in experimental programs that were classified above top secret. The Project X stuff, I ran across the designation once when I was working with archives for the X-15 program. XA designated a propulsion system or a related power unit. Delta meant a modification. Silence fell in the room again. The signal our equipment had picked up hadn't come from the plane as a whole. It had come from a specific component inside it. A component so secret it was labeled with its own unique system. But how could it still be emitting a signal after 60-plus years? David asked. Any power source would be long dead. I don't know, Jake replied. But if this is what I think it is, that plane wasn't just a Sabre. It was some kind of flying laboratory. And whatever they were testing is still working. We sat in that cheap motel room, hundreds of miles from home, terrified and bound by a gag order. But now we had something that Gray and his team didn't. They had taken the wreckage, but we had carried away the ghost that haunted it. A small string of code, a key to the mystery, a key that led not into the past, but into secret programs about which almost nothing was known. Our private mission to find sunken waste had become something else entirely. Now, we had our own mission, to find out what aircraft AF-51 to 922 really was. The next morning, Harrison left us. He was pale and broken. He said he was flying home, that his lawyers advised him to forget everything, and that he strongly recommended we do the same. He left us a wad of cash for expenses and took a taxi to the airport. His departure was no surprise. He was a businessman and a history enthusiast, not a player in a game with stakes this high. Now there were three of us, me, Jake, and David, 3 men against a government machine we never knew existed. Our only lead was a line of code from an unknown device. So what do we do? I asked when we were alone in the motel room. We can't go home, David said. If they were willing to go to those lengths in the swamp, they're probably already checking our houses, our offices, our computers. We have to assume we're being looked for. That inventory number, XA7, G7-1D09, Jake said, his voice low. It leads down some very dark corridors of the past. There are virtually no public archives on Project X. Anything that exists has been scrubbed 3 times over. But I know a guy. His name is Pete Henderson. He was an archivist at the Nevada test site in the 70s, when they forced him into retirement. Let's just say he took more than just memories with him. He lives like a hermit somewhere in the desert, not far from the town of Rachel. He's paranoid as hell, but if anyone can find information on this marking, it's him. The decision was made. We had to get to Nevada. We bought an old pickup truck with cash, got rid of our cell phones, bought cheap burner phones, and headed west. It was a long, nerve-wracking journey, nearly 2,000 miles across sun-scorched highways. Every car with tinted windows that stayed behind us for too long made my heart pound. Every state trooper on the shoulder felt like a trap. We spoke little, slept in shifts, and only stopped for gas. We were fugitives, though we had committed no crime. After 3 days, we reached Nevada. The town of Rachel was little more than a few trailers and a bar in the middle of a vast desert, right next to the infamous Area 51. The place felt appropriate. Everyone here was a little bit crazy and respected other secrets. Following Jake's directions, we turned off the highway onto a barely visible dirt track. After 10 miles of driving through the parched landscape, we came to a high chain-link fence with a sign, "Private property. Trespassers will be shot." Behind the fence stood an old Airstream trailer with several ugly sheds attached to it. Jake got out of the truck and walked to the gate. "Pete, it's me, Jake Ripley. I'm alone." A minute passed before a raspy voice crackled from the trailer. "Get lost, Ripley. I'm not expecting anyone." "Pete, this is important. I have something that will interest you. It's about Project X." Silence again. Then the gate creaked open. Pete was a thin, fidgety old man with wild eyes and a scraggly gray beard. He eyed David and me with suspicion. "Who are they?" "They're my people. They can be trusted," Jake assured him. Pete reluctantly led us onto his property. Inside, the trailer was crammed with shelves of books and binders, but his real treasure was underground. He threw back a rug, revealing a hatch in the floor. We descended a steel ladder into a small, lead-lined bunker. The air was cool and dry. Dozens of steel filing cabinets lined the walls. "So, what do you have?" Pete asked, locking the hatch behind us. David took out the netbook and showed him the string of numbers. Pete put on a pair of glasses and stared at the screen for a long time. His breathing grew ragged. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "It's a long story," Jake said. "Can you find anything on it?" Pete was silent for a minute, then nodded. "Maybe. I haven't seen this designation in 30 years. It's from a very, very bad file." For the next few hours, Pete, muttering to himself, dug through his cabinets. He pulled out yellowed folders, rolls of microfilm, and technical reports with faded "top secret" stamps. Finally, he found what he was looking for. It was a thin folder labeled Project Quantum Observer, Delta Modification, Incident Report October 18th, 58. "Here it is," he said, blowing dust off the cover. He opened it. We saw technical diagrams, graphs, and several pages of typewritten text. XA7 G7-1D09 is not an engine or a navigation system. Pete began to explain, his voice trembling with excitement. Officially, it was a quantum resonance recorder. Unofficially, they called it the Soul Catcher. It was a device designed to create a perfect atom-for-atom copy of an object state at a given moment in time. They wanted to learn how to record not just information, but physical reality itself. The pilot in this experiment was a guinea pig. What went wrong? I asked. Everything, Pete answered. The Delta modification had an experimental isotope-based power source that proved to be unstable. During a test flight on October 18, 1958, there was a power surge. The device malfunctioned. It didn't just record the state of the pilot and plane. He read from the document. An uncontrolled ontological schism occurred. The incident created two identical copies of the event. We listened, holding our breath. It was insane, but this insanity explained everything. One copy, Pete continued, suffered immediate structural collapse and went into a spin, crashing into the water. The second, the report calls it a spatio-temporal displacement. It simply vanished from its original point in space and reappeared at Davis-Monthan. Jake finished for him. Apparently so, Pete nodded, like an echo materializing decades later. And the pilot? Why was he so well preserved? The device and the crashed copy never shut down. It went into a low-energy loop. It's constantly rewriting reality inside that cockpit, returning to the state at the moment of failure. That's why the body doesn't decay. It physically can't, and it's why his ID card looks new. It's not a forgery. It's a perfect copy of the document as it existed a split second before it could age. The machine preserved everything. Pete closed the folder. You found the most dangerous thing my generation ever created. The people behind this. The heirs to those who built this thing. They will stop at nothing to keep it secret. The very fact that you know about this makes you their number one target. Get out of here and forget it ever happened. We thanked Pete and climbed back to the surface, my legs feeling weak. Now we knew the truth, and the truth was more terrifying than any conspiracy. We were driving on a deserted highway, and no one said a word. We understood what we had found, but the questions of why and what now had become even more frightening. As we neared Las Vegas, David, who hadn't taken his eyes off the netbook, suddenly swore under his breath. "What is it?" I asked. That signal. There wasn't just one carrier frequency. There was a second, much weaker one. I thought it was just noise at first. I cleaned it up. It was another encrypted data packet. And what was in it? David looked at me, and I saw real fear in his eyes. It's a timestamp, or rather, 2 timestamps. The first one is October 18th, 1958, 14:32 Greenwich Mean Time, the time of the crash. And the second? He fell silent, rechecking something on the screen. The second one is for tomorrow, July 20th, 2023, 0800 hours. He turned the netbook to me. On the screen, the numbers glowed, sending a chill down my spine. The device at the bottom of the swamp wasn't just preserving the past. It was counting down. And the countdown ended tomorrow, the night before July 20th, we spent in the pickup, parked at a dusty truck stop 100 miles from Las Vegas. Sleep was impossible. The countdown on David's netbook felt like a bomb planted in the very fabric of reality. We went over and over what it could mean. "It can't be a coincidence," David said, swirling cold coffee in a paper cup. 2 timestamps. One marks the beginning of the event. The other marks the end. But the end of what? 2 timestamps, 2 planes, Jake murmured, staring out at the desert darkness. They're linked, like quantum entangled particles. Whatever happens to one is instantly reflected in the other. The timer in the wreckage we found in Mississippi is counting down to something happening to the one Gray has in a hangar. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's going to explode?" "Worse," Jake said. "This device isn't about explosions. It's about reality. It created an echo, a copy. Maybe tomorrow at 0800, it's going to correct its own mistake. It's going to erase the echo." The theory, as insane as it was the only one that fit all the facts. If Jake was right, then tomorrow morning, airframe AF-51 to 922, the one he saw in Arizona, and which was now undoubtedly in a top-secret facility, would simply cease to exist. "We have to see it," I said. It was an irrational, almost suicidal urge, but turning back now was impossible. We had come too far. Jake nodded. He knew these places. He spread an old paper map of the Nevada test and training range on the hood. If I wanted to hide and study something like this, I'd choose this spot. He pointed to a location a few dozen miles north of Groom Lake. Site 7, an old research facility, officially mothballed, but actually one of the most secure bases out here. It's in a valley surrounded by mountains, perfect for isolation, and I know a ridge that overlooks the entire valley. We spent the rest of the night, and the early morning getting to that point. We ditched the pickup in a dry riverbed and hiked for hours up a rocky slope in total darkness. We carried only water, binoculars, and David's netbook. By dawn, we were in position. Below us, miles away, the valley stretched out, and in its center stood a single, windowless concrete hangar, surrounded by a double perimeter fence and watchtowers. There was no visible activity. The place looked asleep. We lay down behind a cluster of rocks. Time dragged on, agonizingly slow. 7 a.m., 7:30, 7:50. Nothing happened. I started to think we were wrong, that this was all a product of our paranoia. David held the netbook, the countdown ticking away. 1 minute, he whispered. I raised the binoculars to the hangar. the image shaking in my hands. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The moment the clock hit 8 hours, there was no explosion, no fire, no smoke. Something far stranger happened. The hangar, for an instant, seemed to shimmer like the air over hot asphalt. For a split second, the concrete walls became translucent, and I could clearly see the dark silhouette of the Sabre fighter inside. And then the ripple was gone. That was it. The hangar just stood there as it had before, but I knew, we all knew, inside it was now empty. The echo had vanished. The paradox had resolved itself. We lay in silence for several minutes, stunned by the quiet catastrophe. It was over. We were witnesses. We had survived. We could leave. We slowly began to gather our things, preparing for the climb down. Guys! David's voice was strange, hollow. He hadn't taken his eyes off the netbook screen, which was connected to the internet via a satellite modem. You need to see this. On the screen was a page from an obscure news site out of Gulfport, Mississippi. A breaking story posted 3 minutes ago. The headline read, "Mysterious disappearance on Pascagoula River. Federal operation vanishes without a trace." I read the text, and the hair on my arm stood on end. The article, citing a frantic Coast Guard and the local sheriff's office, stated that early this morning, at exactly 10 a.m. Central Time, which corresponded to 8 a.m. our time in Nevada, all contact was lost with classified Air Force salvage operation. A reconnaissance helicopter sent to the location found absolutely nothing. No boats, no platform, no equipment, no people. No sign of any operation. Furthermore, the helicopter pilot reported that a sonar scan of the riverbed showed a perfectly smooth, undisturbed silt bottom, as if no plane had ever been there. I lowered the binoculars. I looked at Jake, then at David, and in their eyes, I saw the same understanding that was flooding over me in an icy wave. The device hadn't just erased its copy in Nevada. It had completed the cycle. It had erased the entire event. The original at the bottom of the swamp, and everyone who had touched it. Mr. Gray, Major Evans, their teams in black coveralls and gray boats. All of them had been wiped from reality, along with the wreckage they were trying to hide. They hadn't managed to control the anomaly. The anomaly had controlled them. It had cleaned up every last trace of itself. Except for us. We were the only error in its perfect equation. 3 men on a mountain in Nevada who had seen everything but touched nothing. We survived only because we weren't there. We were the last carriers of a knowledge that the universe itself had tried to erase. We climbed down from the mountain, got in our old pickup, and drove east. We no longer had to look over our shoulders for men in dark suits. Now, we were afraid of something far more fundamental. We drove without a destination, just melting into the endless roads of the country. We never spoke of it again. We didn't need words. We just kept driving.